Commander Sarah Chen stood at her observation post aboard the Earth Defense Station Hyperion, her dark eyes reflecting the shimmer of countless starships gathered for the Millennium's grandest celebration. The massive viewing window before her displayed vessels of every imaginable design, crystalline structures that sparkled like diamonds, organic ships that pulsed with bioluminescence, and sleek crafts that seemed to bend light around their hulls. Quite the spectacle, isn't it? Admiral Marcus Hayes approached quietly, his weathered face illuminated by the dance of lights outside. 1,000 species now, and we're the newest addition to their ranks. Sarah nodded, maintaining her professional composure despite the wonder before her. 73 years since first contact, sir. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. The space around them buzzed with activity as ships from across the galaxy positioned themselves for the ceremony. The Galactic Assembly had chosen the neutral space near Alpha Centauri for this historic occasion, close enough to Earth to remind everyone of humanity's recent inclusion, yet far enough to demonstrate how far they'd come. They still see us as children, Sarah observed, watching as a massive Arcturian dreadnought maneuvered with impossible grace. Advanced children, perhaps, but children nonetheless. Hayes chuckled, but there was a hint of resignation in his voice. Can you blame them? Most of these species achieved faster than light travel before we invented the wheel. The ceremony began with a spectacular display of synchronized energy patterns, 1,000 ships releasing harmless but brilliant pulses of light that formed intricate three-dimensional mandalas across space. Sarah watched as the Proximan delegation, the species being inducted today, guided their crystalline vessels through the formation with practiced precision. That's when she noticed it. A subtle disturbance in the long-range sensor readings displayed on her neural interface. Most would have missed it, but Sarah had spent countless hours studying spatial anomalies during her tenure at the Strategic Defense Academy. "Admiral," she said, her voice dropping to a professional whisper, "something's wrong with the background radiation patterns in Grid Sector 47. Hayes accessed the data through his own interface, frowning as he analyzed the readings. Could be sensor ghost. The alert klaxon cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a knife. Red emergency lights pulsed through the station as multiple sensor arrays confirmed what Sarah had spotted. A massive fleet was emerging from the darkness between stars, their ships appearing in perfect formation as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. By the stars, Hayes breathed, watching as the unknown vessels kept appearing. There must be thousands of them. Sarah's tactical training kicked in as she processed the sensor data. The unknown ships moved with an organic fluidity that reminded her of predators she'd studied in Earth's oceans. Their formation was unlike anything documented in the Galactic Assembly's combat archives. The celebration dissolved into controlled chaos as the Assembly's representatives began emergency protocols. Sarah watched as the more established species immediately took charge, their centuries of experience evident in their swift response. "The Arcturians are mobilizing their dreadnought fleet," Sarah reported, monitoring the tactical feeds. "The Centaurian Defense Force is forming a defensive line. The Sirius Confederation is." She paused, noting how each species fell into predetermined roles based on their status and experience. No one called upon Earth's forces. "We have 14 advanced battle groups ready for immediate deployment," Hayes said quietly, watching the same scenario unfold. "Plus the new Chimera-class adaptable cruisers." Sarah nodded, knowing humanity's ships incorporated innovations that even some advanced species hadn't considered. Yet they waited, relegated to protecting their own system, while ancient powers took the lead. As the unknown fleet drew closer, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that traditional tactics wouldn't be enough this time. She'd spent years studying how different species approached space combat, and something about this enemy felt different. They moved like a force of nature, like something that had evolved rather than been designed. "Sir," she said, her eyes fixed on the approaching armada, "I don't think they're ready for what's coming." The first shots were fired in the distance, brilliant beams of energy crossing the void. The battle for galactic survival had begun, and humanity watched from the sidelines, their potential untapped. their insights unheard. For now, the Strategic Command Center hummed with tense energy as Sarah Chen studied the holographic battle display. 24 hours had passed since the unknown fleet's arrival, and already the situation had deteriorated beyond the Assembly's worst predictions. Another Arcturian dreadnought lost. Lieutenant James Rodriguez reported, his voice tight. The hologram showed a massive red ship icon fading to black. That's the third one in 6 hours. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she watched the replay. The Arcturian vessel, despite its superior firepower and supposedly impenetrable shields, had been systematically dismantled by smaller enemy ships moving in precise, fluid formations. "Play it again," she commanded. "Quarter speed. Focus on enemy ship movements 5 seconds before the kill." The scene unfolded before her once more. The enemy vessels, which some had begun calling the Obsidian Fleet due to their dark, light-absorbing hulls, flowed around the dreadnought like water around a stone. But there was something else, something familiar. There, Sarah pointed, freezing the display. See how they positioned themselves. 3 groups, triangulated approach, creating a zone of. She paused, a memory surfacing from her academy days. "Commander," Rodriguez prompted. Sarah quickly accessed her personal database, pulling up footage from Earth's marine biology archives. She overlaid the recording of a pod of orcas hunting a blue whale onto the battle replay. The patterns matched perfectly. "They're not just fighting." Sarah breathed, excitement creeping into her voice. "They're hunting. These aren't random attack formations. They're predatory strategies refined by evolution." Admiral Hayes, who had been silently observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Explain." Sarah manipulated the hologram, highlighting the enemy ship movements. "Look at their approach vectors. The first group herds the target toward a predetermined location. The second group cuts off potential escape routes. The third group delivers the killing blow, exactly like how orcas hunt larger prey." She pulled up more battle footage, this time showing a different engagement where the Obsidian Fleet had destroyed a Centaurian defense line. And here, this formation mirrors hunting lionesses, spread out, probing for weakness, then converging on the weakest point with overwhelming force. Her fingers flew over the controls, overlaying more Earth predator hunting patterns onto battle replays. Each one revealed striking similarities. Hayes studied the comparisons, his expression thoughtful. "They're using tactical patterns that evolved naturally over millions of years." "Exactly," Sarah nodded. "While we've been trying to understand their strategy through the lens of conventional military doctrine, they're operating on a more primal level." Around them, the command center continued monitoring the ongoing battles. The Assembly's forces, despite their technological superiority, kept falling back. Their rigid, programmed combat protocols were no match for an enemy that moved with the fluid grace of nature's perfect hunters. "Send this analysis to the Assembly Command," Hayes ordered. Sarah's hopes fell slightly as she checked her terminal 30 minutes later. "They've acknowledged receipt, but are proceeding with their original defense plan. The Syrian Grand Fleet is preparing a counteroffensive using traditional formation-based tactics." They watched as the Syrian ships, arranged in their mathematically perfect combat arrays, engaged the enemy. The Obsidian Fleet's response was devastating. They shifted seamlessly between different hunting strategies, sometimes moving like a wolf pack, sometimes like a shark frenzy, always adapting to their prey's behavior. "They're going to lose," Sarah said quietly, watching the Syrian formations crumble. Hayes rested a hand on her shoulder. "Keep working on this. Document everything. Something tells me they'll be ready to listen soon enough." Sarah nodded, already pulling up more Earth predator behavior studies. As she worked, a new alert flashed across her screen. The Obsidian Fleet had broken through the outer defense perimeter. They were advancing toward the core systems. She glanced at the casualty reports, then at her growing database of natural hunting patterns. Somewhere in Earth's evolutionary history lay the key to fighting this enemy. She just had to find it before it was too late. Time to show them what Earth's children have learned from 4 billion years of survival. she whispered, and dove back into her analysis. Sarah's childhood home in Montana had been surrounded by wilderness. She remembered spending countless hours watching wolves hunt in winter, eagles soar through mountain passes, and herds of elk move across vast plains. Now, standing in the Hyperion's combat simulation chamber, those memories were worth more than all her military training. "Run Simulation Alpha 7, she commanded. The chamber hummed to life, projecting a perfect recreation of the latest battle. Holographic ships materialized around her, the sleek assembly vessels in formation, facing the fluid movements of the Obsidian fleet. Add overlay: North American wolf pack hunting patterns, winter season. The computer complied, adding ghostly images of wolves stalking elk through snow. Sarah watched as the predator movements aligned perfectly with the enemy fleet's approach vectors. "They're not just copying one hunting style," she muttered, making notes on her neural interface. "They're switching between different predatory strategies based on their target's behavior." The door slid open, and Admiral Hayes entered with an unexpected guest, Dr. Elena Martinez, Earth's leading expert on swarm behavior studies. "Commander Chen." Dr. Martinez nodded, her eyes already fixed on the simulation. "The Admiral tells me you've made an interesting discovery." Sarah quickly brought up multiple battle recordings. "The enemy fleet moves like Earth's apex predators, but there's more. When faced with larger forces, they adapt using swarm tactics I think you'll recognize." She overlaid footage of locust swarms onto a battle where the Obsidian fleet had overwhelmed a superior force. The patterns were identical. The same fluid distribution, the same way of engulfing their target. "Fascinating." Dr. Martinez stepped closer to the hologram. "They're using strategies that took millions of years to evolve on Earth. But how? Why?" "That's not the most interesting part." Sarah activated another simulation. This time, she highlighted moments where the enemy fleet had faced unexpected resistance. Watch their response to surprise attacks. The holographic ships scattered in a precise pattern, then regrouped in a new formation. Sarah overlaid footage of a starling murmuration evading a peregrine falcon. "They don't just attack like Earth's predators," she explained, excitement creeping into her voice. "They defend like Earth's prey species when necessary. They're using the complete evolutionary playbook." Hayes watched the overlaid patterns with growing understanding. No wonder the assembly's tactics aren't working. They're trying to fight mathematics with nature. "Exactly." Sarah manipulated the display, showing a recent battle. "The assembly relies on computed optimal formations and statistical battle doctrine. But nature doesn't work that way. It's adaptive, fluid, unpredictable within certain patterns." Dr. Martinez studied the data scrolling across her tablet. "These correlations are incredible. But how do we use this knowledge?" Sarah's eyes lit up. She'd been waiting for this question. "Computer, load simulation beta 1." The chamber transformed, now showing the new configuration of ships, Earth's latest Chimera-class cruisers arranged in an unusual formation. "Traditional space combat doctrine treats ships like pieces on a chessboard," Sarah explained. "But I've been programming new tactical algorithms based on natural defense mechanisms. Look at this." She ran the simulation. The Earth ships moved in organic patterns, flowing like a school of fish, suddenly dispersing like startled birds, regrouping like buffalo forming a defensive circle. "Our Chimera-class ships are smaller than most assembly capital ships, but they're more maneuverable. They can actually execute these natural movement patterns." Sarah highlighted the simulation's results. "In testing, this approach improved survival rates by 300% against standard enemy tactics." Hayes and Martinez exchanged glances. The Admiral spoke first. "How soon can you have this ready for actual deployment?" Sarah's response was interrupted by a priority alert. The Obsidian fleet had broken through the last major assembly battle group. They were less than 48 hours from reaching the core systems. "Ready or not," Sarah said, already moving to the tactical station. "We're out of time. The assembly's running out of options." They'll have to listen now. She pulled up the combat roster for Earth's defense fleet, 78 Chimera-class cruisers, each capable of moving like Earth's most successful survivors. It wasn't much against an armada that had crushed the galaxy's greatest powers. But nature had taught her another lesson. Sometimes the smallest creatures survived while the mighty fell. The bridge of the EDS Chimera hummed with nervous energy as Sarah ran final checks on her tactical systems. Through the main viewport, she could see her small squadron of 7 ships maintaining their seemingly random formation, a formation based on hunting dolphins preparing to strike. All ships reporting ready, Commander, Lieutenant Rodriguez announced from his station. He'd insisted on joining her experimental squadron, believing in her theories when most others dismissed them. Sarah acknowledged with a nod, her eyes fixed on the long-range sensors. The Obsidian fleet had split off a hunting group of their own, 30 ships heading toward the Proxima Centauri colony. The Assembly's remaining forces were occupied defending the core systems, leaving this sector vulnerable. Perfect hunting ground for them, Sarah murmured. And for us. She opened a channel to her squadron. Remember your training. Move like water, strike like lightning. Nature is our teacher today. The enemy ships emerged from faster-than-light travel exactly where she predicted. Their formation was familiar now, the same pattern wolves used to isolate prey from a herd. Initiation pattern Dolphin Strike 1. Sarah commanded. Her squadron responded instantly, their ships moving in fluid organic patterns that mirrored a pod of dolphins, separating a small group of prey from a larger school. The enemy responded exactly as nature had taught her they would. Their formation shifted to counter the perceived threat, breaking into smaller groups to surround what they saw as easy prey. Now they think they're the wolves. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Time to show them what it's like to hunt the hunters. Execute pattern Orcapod 7. Her ships suddenly scattered in seemingly random directions, but Sarah knew better. Each movement was precisely calculated to mimic the hunting strategies of Earth's apex marine predators. 3 Chimera-class ships dove beneath the enemy formation like orcas going under an ice sheet. 2 more curved around in a wide arc, matching the pattern of orcas cutting off escape routes. The enemy ships responded with their usual predatory efficiency, but for the first time, they faced opponents moving with equally natural precision. When they adjusted their formation to counter the apparent threat from below, Sarah's ships were already flowing into their next pattern. Pattern Falcon Strike 3. Execute now. The chimeras plunged into the enemy formation like peregrine falcons into a flock of starlings. Their weapons blazed with concentrated fire, each shot timed perfectly with their fluid movements. 3 enemy ships shattered under the assault before they could adapt. Their shifting patterns, Rodriguez called out, moving into their swarm configuration. Sarah had been waiting for this. Spring the trap. Pattern Sharknet 1. Her ships responded instantly, their formation flowing outward like a fishing net cast by experienced hands. The enemy swarm found itself caught between converging lines of fire, their usual fluid grace turned against them by equally dynamic opponents. The battle that followed was unlike anything recorded in Earth's military history. Ships danced through space in patterns perfected by evolution, each side adapting and counter-adapting in real time. But Sarah's squadron had one advantage. They understood both sides of nature's endless dance between predator and prey. When the enemy ships attempted to use locust swarm tactics, Sarah's squadron responded with patterns learned from starling murmurations. When the Obsidian fleet tried to encircle them like wolves, the chimeras scattered and regrouped like schools of fish evading sharks. Enemy formation breaking up, Rodriguez reported, excitement creeping into his professional tone. They've lost 12 ships. No, 14. They're retreating. Sarah watched as the remaining enemy vessels flowed back into faster-than-light travel. Her squadron had suffered damage, but all 7 ships remained operational. They had achieved what the Assembly's mighty fleets could not, a clear victory against the Obsidian fleet. Send the battle recordings to Earth Command and the Assembly, she ordered, already analyzing the enemy's retreat patterns. They move like wounded predators returning to their territory. We've learned something else about them. They can feel fear. As her squadron regrouped to protect the colony, Sarah's neural interface was flooded with incoming communications. The assembly could no longer ignore this success. Earth's ships had proven that nature's lessons, learned over millions of years of evolution, could turn the tide of an interstellar war. The real question was whether they would listen before it was too late. The Assembly's emergency council chamber buzzed with activity as representatives from a dozen species argued over holographic battle footage. Sarah stood calmly at the center, watching her squadron's victory play out for the 20th time that day. "Impossible," declared High Commander Vex of the Arcturian fleet, his crystalline form shimming with agitation. 7 ships cannot defeat 30. The mathematics do not support this outcome. Mathematics didn't achieve this victory, Sarah replied, adjusting the hologram to highlight her ship's movements. Nature did. 4 billion years of evolutionary refinement created these combat patterns. Admiral Hayes stepped forward, supporting his commander. The evidence is undeniable. Commander Chen's tactics have produced the only significant victory against the Obsidian fleet. The Syrian representative, a being of pure energy contained within an environmental suit, pulsed with skepticism. "And you propose we abandon our proven combat doctrine, tactics refined over thousands of years of space warfare." Sarah manipulated the display, bringing up multiple feeds simultaneously. "Look at these patterns. Here's a pod of Orcs hunting. Here's my squadron using the same movements. Here's the enemy fleet attacking the Centaurian defense line. They're using wolf pack hunting strategies." She paused, letting the identical patterns sink in. The Obsidian fleet fights like nature's perfect predators. To defeat them, we must understand how nature's prey survives and how its hunters succeed. The chamber erupted in overlapping arguments. Sarah noticed Dr. Martinez entering quietly, carrying a data pad filled with new analysis. The scientist caught her eye and nodded. They'd found something else. "Honorable representatives," Sarah raised her voice slightly, commanding attention. "While we debate, 3 more assembly battle groups have fallen. The enemy advances using strategies perfected by evolution. We must adapt or face extinction." A subtle shift rippled through the chamber. The word extinction carried weight with species who had risen from evolutionary crucibles of their own. The Centaurian admiral, her biomechanical form humming softly, spoke for the first time. "Your victory is impressive, Commander. But can these tactics scale? 7 ships is one thing. Coordinating entire fleets is another." Sarah smiled. This was the opening she'd been waiting for. "Dr. Martinez, would you share our latest findings?" The scientist stepped forward, projecting new data. "We've analyzed Commander Chen's success and combined it with our studies of large-scale natural phenomena. Starling murmurations, fish schools, even the collective behavior of single-celled organisms. Nature has already solved the problem of coordinating vast numbers with perfect efficiency." The hologram showed new battle simulations, hundreds of ships moving in flowing, organic patterns. Each individual unit follows simple rules derived from natural systems, creating complex group behaviors that can adapt instantly to threats. "The enemy uses these principles instinctively," Sarah added. "We can implement them consciously, combining nature's wisdom with our tactical awareness. My squadron succeeded because we understand both the hunter and the hunted." High Commander Vex's crystalline surface rippled thoughtfully. "You have contingencies for different enemy responses. Nature has faced every possible threat over billions of years," Sarah replied, bringing up more simulations. "When prey animals face swarm predators, they form defensive spheres. When hawks attack, starlings create confusion with fluid dynamics. Every natural defense we've studied has a space combat application." The chamber grew quiet as the implications sank in. The Syrian representative pulsed rapidly, their species equivalent of intense calculation. "The Syrian Grand Fleet will adapt 2 battle groups to test these tactics," they announced finally. The Centaurian Defense Force will do the same, the Admiral added. One by one, the representatives committed forces to Sarah's new strategy. As they filed out to implement the changes, Admiral Hayes approached her quietly. "They're still skeptical," he murmured, "but they're desperate enough to try anything now." Sarah nodded, already planning the training protocols. Nature spent billions of years perfecting these strategies. We don't have that long, but we have something just as valuable: the ability to learn from Earth's entire evolutionary history at once. She turned to Dr. Martinez, who was collating data from the various fleet commanders. "How long to implement the new protocols?" "For basic patterns, 24 hours, the scientist replied. "But the enemy is adapting too. They've already shown new hunting strategies in the outer sectors." Sarah squared her shoulders, watching the tactical display where the Obsidian fleet continued its advance. "Then we'll have to evolve faster than they do. Earth's history tells us something else about nature. Sometimes the best survival strategy is to change the rules of the game entirely." The Hyperion Strategic Command Center had transformed into an evolutionary war room. Holographic displays showed hundreds of ships practicing nature-inspired combat patterns, while Sarah and Dr. Martinez fine-tuned the coordination protocols. "Syrian Battle Group Theta, your movements are too rigid." Sarah spoke into the fleet-wide channel. "Think like a school of fish. Let the currents of battle guide your formations." She watched as the energy beings adjusted their ship's movements, flowing more naturally through space. "Much better," Dr. Martins nodded, monitoring the efficiency metrics. Their response time improved by 30%. Admiral Hayes entered, his expression grave. "The Obsidian fleet has adapted again. They've developed a new attack pattern we haven't seen before." Sarah pulled up the latest battle footage. The enemy ships moved in a strange, spiraling formation that seemed to pull their targets into a tactical vortex before destroying them. "Wait," she manipulated the playback. "I've seen this before." Her fingers flew over the controls, bringing up archived footage from Earth's oceans. "Look, it's exactly how spinner dolphins hunt. They create a spiral of bubbles to trap fish, then strike from multiple angles. They're learning from Earth's predators too," Martins realized. "But how?" "It doesn't matter how," Sarah replied, already adapting her tactical algorithms. "What matters is that we understand these patterns better than they do. We've studied them our entire history." She opened a channel to all Allied fleets. "Operation Wild Hunt is now active. All ships, implement Protocol Adapt 7. Across 12 star systems, hundreds of ships began moving in new patterns. Arcturian dreadnoughts flowed like whale pods, their crystalline forms gracefully sliding through space. Syrian energy ships pulsed and swarmed like brilliant schools of bioluminescent fish. Centaurian bioships moved with the precise coordination of ant colonies. "Enemy fleet approaching the Proxima defense line," Rodriguez reported from his tactical station. "They're using the spinner formation again." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Perfect. Spring the trap. Execute Pattern Reef Defense 1. The Allied ships suddenly shifted their formation. Like the intricate ecosystem of a coral reef, each fleet segment took on a specific role. Smaller ships darted out like cleaner fish, larger vessels held position like anchored coral formations, and patrol groups circled like reef sharks. The Obsidian fleet's spiral attack pattern broke against this dynamic defense like a wave against a reef. When they tried to adjust, the Allied ships smoothly transitioned to their next pattern. "Pattern Savannah Strike 3, Sarah commanded. "Show them what happens when the prey decides to hunt back." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Ships moved in formations inspired by everything from hunting lionesses to defensive zebra herds. When the enemy adapted to one pattern, the Allied fleet smoothly flowed into another. "Enemy losses mounting," Rodriguez reported, excitement breaking through his professional tone. "They're trying to regroup using some kind of swarm configuration." "They're not the only ones who can swarm," Sarah responded. "All ships, implement Protocol Hive Mind 2. The Allied fleet suddenly broke apart into smaller groups, each moving with the precise coordination of a bee swarm. They surrounded enemy formations, cutting off escape routes with the efficiency of nature's most successful collective organisms. Amazing, Dr. Martinez whispered, watching the battle unfold. The coordination levels are beyond anything we've seen before. Admiral Hayes studied the tactical display with growing optimism. We're not just surviving anymore. We're winning. Sarah nodded, but kept her focus on the enemy's movements. They were adapting again, trying new patterns, seeking weakness. But each time they changed tactics, she recognized the natural inspiration behind their movements. Earth's evolutionary history had prepared humanity for exactly this moment. We've driven them back from 3 systems, Rodriguez announced. The Obsidian fleet is retreating to regroup. They'll be back, Sarah replied, already analyzing their retreat patterns. And they'll have studied our tactics, learned from them. Nature's arms race never ends. Predator and prey constantly evolve in response to each other. She turned to Admiral Hayes. We need to push our advantage. The next phase of Operation Wild Hunt should target their command structure. In nature, apex predators become vulnerable when they lose their coordination. Hayes nodded. Agreed. What's our next move? Sarah pulled up a simulation of her most ambitious strategy yet, one inspired by how small prey animals sometimes turned the tables on their predators. We're going hunting, she said simply. And this time, we're not the prey. Sarah stood on the bridge of the EDS Chimera, now the command ship for the largest fleet assemblage in galactic history. Through the main viewport, she watched ships from a dozen species moving in perfect harmony, like a vast ecosystem preparing for a decisive moment. All battle groups report ready, Rodriguez announced from his station. The Arcturians and Syrians have fully integrated the new neural pattern protocols. Dr. Martinez, who had insisted on being present for this operation, studied the biological readouts. The enemy fleet's movements have become more erratic. They're showing signs of stress, like an animal that's been pushed too far from its natural hunting grounds. Sarah nodded, watching the tactical display where the Obsidian fleet had gathered its remaining strength. They'd retreated to a dense asteroid field, using the natural cover to protect their formations. But Sarah saw something else in their positioning. They're cornered, she observed. And cornered predators are the most dangerous. All ships prepare for Operation Genesis. The name was fitting. They would either create a new beginning or meet their end. The combined fleet began moving, each section flowing into position like distinct species sharing a complex habitat. First wave, execute pattern River Delta 9. Sarah commanded. The smaller ships surged forward in branching formations, mimicking how river waters found multiple paths to the sea. They wove through the asteroid field, turning the enemy's chosen terrain against them. The Obsidian fleet responded immediately, their ships rising from the asteroids like disturbed predators. But their once fluid movements now showed hints of desperation. They're attempting to form their spiral hunt pattern, Rodriguez reported. Perfect. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. All ships transitioned to pattern Tidepool 3. The Allied fleet suddenly fragmented into countless smaller groups, each occupying its own space, like the diverse life forms in a tidepool ecosystem. When the enemy's spiral formation struck, it found no central mass to trap and destroy. Arcturian dreadnoughts, begin pattern Whale Song 1. Sarah ordered. The massive crystalline ships started emitting complex energy patterns, disrupting the enemy's coordination just as whale songs carried through ocean depths. It's working, Martinez exclaimed. Their swarm cohesion is breaking down. The energy patterns are interfering with their ability to maintain tight formations. The battle evolved rapidly, with both sides adapting and counter-adapting. But Sarah had one more card to play. A strategy based on one of nature's most fascinating phenomena. All ships prepare for pattern Phoenix rebirth, she announced. This was the maneuver they'd practiced in secret, the one that had seemed impossible until they understood how certain organisms used apparent death as a survival strategy. The Allied fleet suddenly went dark, cutting power to all non-essential systems. They drifted like dead things in space, their formation breaking apart as if destroyed. The enemy fleet, sensing victory, moved in for the kill. Energy spike in the enemy formation. Rodriguez warned. They're charging weapons. Hold, Sarah commanded. Wait for them to commit. She watched as the Obsidian fleet moved closer, abandoning their careful formations in their eagerness to finish their wounded prey. Now, all ships execute full pattern. Like a phoenix rising from its ashes, the Allied fleet surged back to life. But instead of each ship reactivating individually, they powered up in a precise sequence that created a cascading wave of energy. The effect caught the enemy ships in a web of overlapping gravitational fields, like insects trapped in a spider's web. Pattern complete, Rodriguez reported triumphantly. Enemy fleet is contained. Sarah opened a channel to all ships. Begin final approach. Pattern harmony strike one. The Allied fleet moved as one, like a single vast organism that had evolved beyond the need for individual actions. Each ship knew its role. Each formation flowed into the next with perfect precision. The Obsidian fleet, trapped and disrupted, began to break apart under the assault. Their once perfect hunting patterns dissolved into chaos. Enemy ships are attempting to retreat, Rodriguez announced. But the gravitational web is holding. Sarah watched as the battle reached its crescendo. Nature's greatest lesson had proven true. Adaptation, cooperation, and understanding of natural patterns could overcome any threat. All ships press the advantage, she commanded. Show them that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our tactics. It's our ability to learn from every living thing that came before us. The aftermath of victory filled the Hyperion's observation deck with an ethereal light show as damaged ships from both sides drifted through space. Sarah stood at her usual spot, watching recovery vessels move like cleaner fish through the debris field, saving survivors and salvaging what they could. Final casualty reports coming in, Rodriguez said softly, joining her at the window. We lost 27% of our combined fleet, but the enemy. He paused, double-checking his data. 94% of the Obsidian fleet has been destroyed or captured. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on a particular group of captured enemy vessels. Their dark hulls no longer seemed menacing, but rather beautiful in their own way, like watching a caged predator that you could finally appreciate without fear. Commander Chen, Admiral Hayes approached with a delegation of assembly representatives. The analysis teams have completed their preliminary examination of the captured ships. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her excitement barely contained. You were right, Sarah. The enemy vessels aren't just mimicking natural patterns. They're designed based on organic principles. Their entire technology is built around evolutionary optimization, which makes our victory even more significant. The Syrian representative pulsed brightly. We defeated them using their own fundamental principles, but with greater understanding and purpose. High Commander Vex's crystalline form shimmered with what Sarah had learned to recognize as deep respect. Our species have all risen from evolutionary crucibles, yet we forgot those lessons in our rush to embrace pure technology. Humanity reminded us of what we left behind. The Assembly has reached a unanimous decision, Hayes announced, his voice carrying the weight of historical significance. We're establishing the Earth Institute of Evolutionary Strategy. Every spacefaring species will send their finest minds to study humanity's understanding of natural combat and survival patterns. Sarah turned from the window, surprised. Every species, even the elder races, especially the elder races, the Centaurian admiral hummed. We've existed longer, but you understand something we've forgotten. The endless dance between predator and prey, the constant evolution of strategy and counter-strategy. This knowledge must be preserved and developed. Dr. Martinez activated a holographic display showing the first architectural plans for the Institute. We're combining training facilities with actual Earth biomes. Future commanders will study not just records, but living examples of the patterns that saved us all. And not just for military applications, Rodriguez added. The same principles that guided our fleet movements can optimize everything from trade routes to search and rescue operations. Nature's wisdom applies everywhere. Sarah watched as more ships arrived through hyperspace, vessels from distant sectors coming to study the battlefield and learn from this historic victory. Each ship now moved with a hint of natural grace, their formations unconsciously mimicking organic patterns. The Obsidian fleet taught us something crucial, she reflected. They showed us that space isn't just an empty void to be conquered with technology. It's an ecosystem, as rich and complex as any ocean or forest. We just needed to learn how to swim in it properly. Speaking of swimming, Hayes smiled. The Assembly has another announcement. The Chimera-class ships are being renamed. From now on, they'll be known as the Orca class, in honor of the first natural strategy you used to defeat the enemy. Sarah felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for every creature that had contributed to this victory through their evolutionary wisdom. From the wolves that taught them pack tactics to the starlings that showed them swarm defense, from the whales that inspired their long-range formations to the ants that demonstrated perfect coordination. Commander, Rodriguez interrupted her thoughts. The first training fleet is requesting permission to begin their natural strategy exercises. They're eager to learn. Sarah straightened her uniform and smiled. The real work was just beginning. They had won this war by remembering Earth's lessons, but maintaining peace would require even deeper understanding. Tell them to prepare for their first lesson, she said, walking toward the tactical room. We'll start with something simple, how a single-celled organism learned to survive in a hostile world, and how those same principles can guide us among the stars. The universe, she knew, was full of threats and challenges, but Earth had spent billions of years developing solutions to every possible problem. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't just victory in one war. It was the accumulated wisdom of an entire planet's evolutionary history.